Welcome, everyone. Simon Rosenberg here at Hopium Chronicles. We've got a great event today. I'm being joined by Jane Kleeb, my very dear friend, Nebraska Democratic Party chair, candidate to be the next chair of the Association of State Democratic Committees, the ASDC. We'll learn more about what that is in a few minutes, but welcome, Jane.
Thanks for having me. And first, let me just say thank you to all the Hopium subscribers and supporters. You guys were a huge boost to us in Nebraska. We're sending out a postcard that you should get over the holidays as a thank you. There'll be a QR code there that you can scan to look at a report of all the things that we did with the resources that you invested in us.
Well, Jane, thank you. And it was really, we're really proud of your success and what you did. I want to talk about that in a second. And just mention that, the whole predicate or the whole theory of the Harris campaign by focusing on Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin only made sense if we also won the blue dot in Nebraska. So why don't you just talk a little bit about why it was that you really were the eighth battleground state in this election, and we won the blue dot, right? Even though we didn't win everything else. But talk a little bit about what happened in Nebraska this cycle, what you did that was new programmatically, and also a little bit of the history that you've talked about where when you became chair, there were 500 elected Democrats in Nebraska. Now there are over 900, I think, right? So let's walk us through the story of what happens when you have a successful, ambitious, aggressive party with a plan.
I can't wait to talk about this, Simon, because normally what happens is press begins to write off red states or states like Nebraska because we didn't win the second congressional district for Tony Vargas or we didn't win a US Senate seat. And they miss all these other infrastructure wins that we made, as well as down ballot wins. So, first, we were a battleground state, even though we weren't usually profiled by national media, because Maine and Nebraska split our electoral votes. In the second congressional district, we gave an electoral vote to Obama in 2008. We gave one to Biden in 2020, and we gave one to Kamala Harris and Tim Walz in 2024. We all thought that this was going to be a razor thin margin election and that it was going to come down to that one electoral vote. And in fact, Trump's team also thought that because they were trying to basically bribe state senators to change the electoral vote system. And that was a lot of work in and of itself to keep 17 Democrats, Republicans, and independents together in a coalition to protect that fair split electoral vote system. So we accomplished that task. And then we accomplished the very difficult task of winning that electoral vote. And we did it by pretty wide margins. So Nebraska, little red Nebraska, the flyover state that they all think we are, we were the only battleground target to actually hit mission accomplished this cycle. And I think that's because of a couple of things. One, we invested heavy for the first time this year because we had the resources in partisan voter registration. So we added 10,000 new Democrats to the voter rolls. That was critical. As you know, in about 2004, the Democratic kind of big donors decided they were going to put all the voter registration money into C3s and C4s because they thought that was going to be a better use of money. So partisan groups could focus on recruiting and electing Democrats. In theory, that sounded great. But what's been happening is when a C3 nonpartisan groups goes to register voters, they're not talking about being a Democrat. So we're losing that first interaction with a voter when they're deciding what party they're going to join. So many young people over the past 15, 20 years have become independents. And we're seeing that in the registration numbers all across the nation. So we invested in partisan voter registration. We also invested in our block captain program. Precinct captains, we heard from folks, were too big. So we narrowed that to give volunteers 50 voters in their neighborhood. So it's people literally on their block. They contact those voters 3 times. It's a very organized program. They deliver things like a Democrat's newspaper, a voter guide, a vote by mail application. That significantly helped turnout. And we worked really well with the Harris and Walz team. Sometimes, Simon, when the presidential campaigns or the DCCC comes in, they kind of stamp and stomp on state parties and don't respect the infrastructure. We made it very clear, like, this is our lane. This is what we're good at. We're good at voter reg. We're good at vote by mail. We're good at our block captain program. And then they did the areas that they were good at, and that actually worked really well. So that resulted in, we went from 504 Democrats in 2017 to we're now at 1,025 Democrats as of 2024. And that's because of all the hard work we've been doing to build our infrastructure.
And when you say, so you've doubled the number of Democratic elected officials in Nebraska, what kind of offices are we talking about, right? Help people
Yes.
understand what we mean by that.
We're talking about state legislative races, State Board of Education, regents at the University of Nebraska, city council. In Nebraska, we're a very unique state. We have 100% public power. So we actually decide how our utilities are run and the rates and what type of electricity is put onto the grid. Those are all elected offices. So we elect those. We just crushed school board races in the Republican Party because they basically have no money in the state of Nebraska. It's so interesting. We're a red state, but the Republican Party's run by a bunch of MAGA folks. So the elite donors took all the money out of the Republican Party. They focused only on school board races this cycle, and we just crushed them all across the state because they were focused on privatizing public schools. We had a ballot initiative in the state to protect our public schools. So all of our candidates ran on that. The ballot initiative won, and our candidates won as well. And I get, people criticize me as a leader in our state party that we haven't been able to win statewide a US Senate race since Nelson in 2006. And, Dan Osborne came close as an independent, but he had $30 million and he still couldn't get over the finish line. It's going to be a while, and we're going to have to register, lots more Democrats before we can win statewide. We should have, and we wanted, and we all thought, even Don Bacon thought, we were going to win the 2nd congressional district for Tony Vargas. And we came up short, about 6,000 votes. So we are analyzing that and how we can figure out to break the rural vote. And that's basically where we lost it. We won in Douglas County. Tony beat Bacon in Douglas County, and we got our margins up in Sarpy County. There was a slice of that, but Saunders County, it's 100% rural. We lost it. And this is the story of Democrats all across our nation. We are losing the rural vote.
And Jane, two things that of just what you just said. Number one is that there is clearly the issue around partisan registration is going to be one of the most important things we need to talk about in the various chairs races in the next 6 weeks, because Tom Bonnier is starting to crunch numbers. We're starting to get vote history now in some of the states, and we're seeing a clear pattern that over the last few years, Republicans registered a lot of people and we didn't. And so the electorate became much more Republican because we've ceded the ground on partisan registration. We don't register Democrats anymore as a party. And that's something has to change. And I think that your experience in this is going to become really important because we have to learn from what you've done, because very few states have done partisan registration in recent years. And we're going to need to learn from what you've done to replicate that across the country. The second thing is talk a little bit about the rural vote. I mean, this became a big issue. How do we expand our coalition? How do we go to places that we're not winning? There's a lot of talk about how we have to try to win everywhere. We did have Governor Walz on the ticket, who was born in a rural part of Nebraska. I mean, reflect a little bit upon that if you could for everybody.
I wrote a book about rural votes and
I
how
know.
Democrats can win again in rural
Mhm.
areas. And so I should have been the one that could have won that rural county for Senator Vargas. And the reality is, we need years of investment. We basically have not invested in our rural areas for the past 20 years. And so it is going to also take 20 years of investment to get that rural vote back. It doesn't mean that we won't see gains for 20 years. We will see gains kind of every election cycle if we are investing in rural states. But we have to, I think, take a step back. When Howard Dean was chair, when we had this 57 state and territory national party, state parties and territories were getting $25,000 a month to not only invest in core staff of executive director, finance, data, field, but they also were able to then run program. When Barack Obama became president, he did not have a good relationship with the party, and for good reasons, right? I mean, the party was behind then Secretary Clinton, Senator Clinton, and Barack Obama felt like the party infrastructure didn't help him. He ran an entire Organizing for America. So a lot of the investments went to outside groups. This was the period of our party at the national and state level where we started to invest in outside groups rather than partisan Democratic groups. This is when we started to invest in quote unquote progressive groups. The issue with this is that one, it's not lasting infrastructure. Groups pop up and they go down. Two, the word progressive is not on the ballot. The word Democrat is, right? We run Democrats. We don't run progressives. So when Barack Obama became president, the DNC decided instead of $25,000 a month for state parties, you're going to get $2,500. What do you think that did? We lost 1,500 state legislative and statewide seats in the states the next 2 years. It wasn't just magic, or it wasn't a backlash of 2 years of Barack Obama being president. It was because we stopped investing in partisan infrastructure. It got better under Perez. It got better under Harrison. State parties are now at 12,500 for blue and purple states, 15,000 for red states. And that also was because of a lot of scars. I have a lot of scars. Ken Martin has a lot of scars. As ASDC president, I would be negotiating with the DNC for a 4-year contract of how much state parties get, who owns the voter file, what type of innovation grants do we give beyond the monthly amounts that we give, plus lots of other pieces that basically build the infrastructure of state and national party. So these are critical races that we are going into, that we will be voting on February 1st and February 2nd, that will decide if we're going to win elections again at the state and national level, or if we're going to continue to cede ground to Republicans.
And can you talk, Jane, you've thrown your hat into the ring to be the chair of the chairs, as I call it, the chairwoman or the chairperson of the Association of State Democratic Chairs. It's a position that Ken Martin, who is running for national chair, currently holds. Can you talk a little bit about the ASDC and how it works and what it would mean? Because if you were to become the chair of the chairs, you would also be a vice chair of the DNC. So can you just walk us through how that all works a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So as the ASDC president, you basically, one of your first main tasks is negotiating that contract with the DNC to make sure that the state parties have resources. One of the other big tasks is protecting the state party voter file. So many times, year after year, it happened when we lost in 2016, you will see private donors coming in to say, look, the DNC is down and out. Private entities can run the voter file system so much more efficient, very like similar to what Elon Musk says to people, and let us buy your voter files. So one of the biggest things that the president does is protect our state party voter files. We have a party co-op that has a partnership with the DNC to keep on updating that every year to make sure that people have data. So when you open your minivan as a volunteer, there's good data in there, and we're continuing to help candidates be able to win elections. The other thing that we do is work on messaging, and we work on training. We don't have a good system in place right now to actually onboard our state chairs. And we don't have a unified system of if a chair is paid or not paid. Right now, across our country, only 10 state party chairs are paid. I'm a volunteer party chair. That means that I have a full-time job, and I have a full-time job as a volunteer to run a staff of 7, recruit 400 candidates every year when we have elections, raise $1 million, do all the things a party chair has to do. We've got to professionalize our association and professionalize this infrastructure. This is not the 50s and 60s when lawyers and other rich people were running Democratic clubs. This is real infrastructure with real impact on people's lives, because we're about electing Democrats. That's basically our job. And so that is one of the critical roles as a state party association president, is that I would be creating the training programs, making sure state parties have resources, making sure that we're professionalizing our association.
Yeah, and I will tell you that I think, as somebody who's a party guy and who started working with the state chairs during the 1992 election, where we created a partnership between the Clinton campaign and the ASDC to create a national grassroots program for the campaign. And then I ran for chair in 2005 of the National Party, lost to Howard Dean, and I have watched what you're describing, right, which is this sort of the this strategic um, a strategy to essentially make the parties smaller in the infrastructure, make the infrastructure, the family bigger, but make the centrality of the party, because the party and the parties are the most important part of our infrastructure. They're the biggest and most powerful. I always say that my sister will volunteer for the Democratic Party. She's never going to go volunteer for something called America Votes, right? And as important as America Votes is in our family or other organizations. And I think that there has been, in a way, and this may become shocking to people watching this today, how much of the centrality of the party as the goal and the necessity of making the party, our biggest institution in our family, as powerful and strong as it possibly could be. That has actually not been a collective goal of the family. It's actually
Right.
been, there have been many people who've wanted the parties to be smaller and for various reasons. And I do think that part of what's happening now is the combination of kind of all-star party chairs like Anderson Clayton and Ben Wickler and you, Jane, right? The chairs race that's coming, the fact that the DNC picked our nominee this time, right? That in essence we had this very unusual thing happen where 448 people, got to pick the nominee. That there's all of a sudden an opportunity, I think, to reintroduce the necessity as a family to make sure the party apparatus is the strongest it can possibly be in order for us to win. And that this sort of shedding of party responsibilities to outside C3 and C4 groups, while it may have been a good idea, there are also enormous limitations to this.
Mhm.
And as we're learning, just even with partisan registration, I mean, it's possible that we lost this election because we didn't adopt partisan, or one of the reasons we lost. There isn't any one reason, but one of the contributing reasons is that we got our ass kicked in partisan registration in recent years. It was particularly acute in Pennsylvania, by the way. I mean, we know this. So I think that one of the opportunities that we have in January, and can you talk a little bit about what's going to happen with the elections? And we have an election on February 1st. And
Yes.
it's not just for national chair, there's also vice chairs and other positions. Can you talk a little bit about how that's going to work?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now there's the race for chair. That election will happen on February 1st, but then there's also a vice chair for voter engagement, and there's about 4 people already running for that position. There's 3 at-large vice chair positions, and then there's a secretary, a treasurer, and a finance chair. DNC members are the ones that elect those folks. And so you may ask, who's a DNC member? There's basically about 450 DNC members across the country. Every state has at least 4: your state party chair, vice chair, and then a DNC committee man and a DNC committee woman. Other states then have additional DNC members because they have a larger electorate of Democrats. Like Illinois, for example, has 30 DNC members. Little old Nebraska has 4. So, it varies across the state. If you're wondering how you can contact your DNC member, they're normally posted on your state party's website. If they're not, you can contact your state party office if you're wanting to basically contact those folks to encourage them to vote for particular people for chair, vice chair. My position, for example, is only voted on by state party chairs and vice chairs. So I have a voting electorate of 114, all 50 state, and then the 7 territories.
This would be for the state being head of the state chairs.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct. And I automatically then become a DNC vice chair. So all of the DNC races, those happen on February 1st. My race is on February 2nd. There will be 4 public forums for the DNC chair and some of the down ballot races as well, 2 in person, 2 online. Those haven't been 100% publicly announced of when exactly those will be. Chair Harrison will be announcing those soon. The ASDC is doing its own kind of, forums for chairs and vice chairs since it's a much smaller electorate of folks that are voting on that. But these are critical races, and DNC members represent you. So just like your member of Congress represents you in Congress and your state leg person represents you in your legislature, your DNC members represent you. They don't represent themselves. So you have every right to call them. You shouldn't be mean to them. You shouldn't scream at them, but you should be respectful and say, hey, I want XYZ person to be chair or vice chair, and these are the reasons why. A lot of DNC members do want to hear from folks in our states.
And the way that DNC members in the states are appointed is that they're appointed usually by the governor. If there's a governor in the state that they get to with the party, how does that work? How do you
Yeah.
become a DNC committee person? And then there are at-large positions as well, right, that are appointed by the national chair. Is that also correct?
Yes, so it's a little different in each state for DNC members, but the four core positions of a state party chair, vice chair, and then the two DNC members, those are usually elected at a state convention. So the largest body of your state party, your state central committee, that's where you usually elect those people. So those are where we consider those are the ones that are most represented by the grassroots. Then you do have, like you said, Simon, like your governor or US senator sometimes appoints additional members that you're allotted from the DNC. And then there's something called the 75 at-large DNC members. Just a little bit of history. When Jesse Jackson ran for president, the DNC looked very white, very upper middle class, was not very diverse. One of the things that he wanted was that there was more communities of color, more working class people that were DNC members. And so oftentimes people were coming up from the county through the state to become DNC members, and communities of color, young people weren't usually coming up that way. So they created these at-large positions. The problem with the at-large positions over the years is that they've become the total opposite of what Jesse Jackson and the activists at the time wanted. A lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of times these are now given to DC insiders, consultants, big donors, and they're representing interests of kind of the DC consulting class rather than the grassroots and communities of color or underrepresented communities from people that are elected in the states. That is a reform that myself, Ken Martin, Ben, several others are certainly talking about, that perhaps there should be actually different types of quotas. Like Nebraska created 25 at-large positions, but we created structures for them. So 5 have to be from rural areas, 5 have to be young people, 4 are for tribal nations, et cetera. So that's an area of reform. The committee structure also is an area of reform, and this is something that myself and Ken have been talking about for years. The chair right now gets to appoint not only all those 75 at-large positions, but the chair gets to appoint all the committees and all the committee chairs. So there's no regional representation. There's no representation of state party chairs and vice chairs. There's only 2 state party chairs right now on the Rules and Bylaws Committee, for example, which is the most critical committee in our party because that's the committee that sets the presidential primary schedule. So that's something that has to be changed. We're advocating at the ASDC that at least 33% of each committee is made up of chairs and vice chairs because we're the ones who have to implement all of the
Yeah.
rules that the DNC puts on our shoulders.
Seems like a reasonable reform.
Seems
I
like a
mean,
reasonable request.
and I think, it is amazing, Jane, when I think back in our race that I ran for a chair 20 years ago, one of the big debates we had, and this whole issue about party reform is important because, like any institution, things change and we have to adapt, with them and learn. Because even well-intentioned reform sometimes can go awry, right, and not work out. But what I'm very proud of in what we did, and this is why this debate around the coming debate in January is going to be so important, because ideas get aired out that become important for us, whoever becomes the leaders of the party, to implement and to make things better for us. And so in 2005, even though I didn't become national chair, one of my main things that I argued for was expanding what I called ending the Iowa-New Hampshire duopoly, right? And adding a southern state and a southwestern state to allow Hispanics and African Americans to start to play a meaningful role in picking our nominee. And even though I didn't win, my plan was adopted in the spring of 2005. We ended up adding South Carolina and Nevada to our early primary window. And in that very next election, in 2008, we elected an African American, our candidate, to be our nominee because we changed the nature of how we elected our And I will look back on my career, and that's one of the things I'm most proud of. But the reason I raise this is that the debate that's about to happen is really important because, like in a presidential primary, what happens in presidential primaries is that we have a big debate about our future and our party and the country. And this debate, this battle of ideas and people looking to innovate and change and grow, and even candidates who may be second tier who don't win. I'll put myself at 1.5 tier maybe in the race 20 years
You were
ago.
top
Yeah.
tier, Simon. That's right.
I came very close to winning, but the point is that this debate that's about to happen is really important.
Yeah.
And first of all, I'm grateful for your leadership in Nebraska. I'm also grateful that you're going to try to lead the state chairs now. I mean, I do have always believed the ASDC is an undervalued part of our
Mhm.
institutional family. And the work that I've done with the ASDC, Tom Bonnier and I saw you out in Phoenix. I mean, we just spoke. Anything that the ASDC's ever asked me to do, I do, right? Because you guys are on the front lines. You're doing the hard work. I think it's going to be shocking for people to hear today that 40 of our 50 state chairs, not other 57, but of the 50 are unpaid, right? I
Yes.
mean, I think this is going to be a shocking thing, particularly given, I think, Jane, I want to reflect on one other thing before we go, is that one of the things that Ken and I spoke about when Ken joined us a few weeks ago was this notion that so much of even the thing you were describing earlier about the shaving off of capacity into other institutions that were not hard dollars into C3 and C4 or into progressive organizations was done as a pragmatic sort of decision about allocation of resources, right? And that came in a time of scarcity where we didn't have a lot of money. I mean, I'm old enough to, the Clinton campaign in 1992, right? We had like 150, 200 staff on the whole campaign in the primary system. Now these campaigns have thousands of people,
Yeah.
working on them. And the thing is, there was a lot of our legacy strategy and approach towards things that were coming from a time of scarcity. But now, because of the Democratic grassroots and because there are 6 million proud patriots that now are giving us money in this last election, we are living in a time of abundance and not
Mhm.
a time of scarcity, meaning that the idea of paying state party chairs and professionalizing state party chairs is something that's clearly within our financial capacity to do. And so, could you reflect upon this notion, particularly because you've been in this business long enough? We met when you were executive director of the Young Dems 20
Yes.
years ago, right? Is that you have also seen this transition
Mhm.
of a party of scarcity to abundance. And can you reflect on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And just one thing before I do that too, Simon, when I was with the Young Dems, we didn't even have a quota of young people for national conventions. And that was a reform that we pushed when I was at Young Dems. And I just say that because when you get into the inside, you can push for reforms. And so for folks listening, it's like you should run to be a DNC member because if you're pulling your hair out saying these things should happen, these things should happen, this message should happen, run to be a DNC member because we can no longer have the status quo. And it is time for us to think bigger. We have had basically about 10 people in Washington, D.C. control the way that the DNC and the state parties operate. And that has got to end. And that has happened for the past 15 years. So, despite really strong leaders like myself, Ben, Ken, Anderson, several others, it's really difficult to break through that 15 when they have controlled and monopolized the way that we've done things. Even Chair Harrison, I'm sure come February 2nd, when he, as in his own words says, has his muzzle off, he will be a lot more candid about the things that he was told he could and could not do as chair of our party. And no chair should be able to be told by a group of individuals in DC what they can and cannot do. They are the leader of our party. So it is time for us to not only do the set of reforms that the ASDC, we had a committee on the future, we've put forward a set of reforms, we're introducing that to DNC chairs, things like paid chairs, 4-year terms, more money to state parties, et cetera. But we also need something, Simon, like we need our own Project 2025. It is absolutely bonkers and nuts that we think that we can live inside talking points in a message box, but not have a larger vision for our party. I often think about, when was the last time we had a large vision? Was it FDR? Was it Bill Clinton? Was it Barack Obama? Like, we don't have a large vision for our party anymore. We can't go to people in rural communities in a dive bar or a wine bar with moms, with their Be Kind stickers on their minivan, because we need both of those groups of voters in order to win again. And we don't have a message that's going to resonate to both of them. And that is a fundamental problem. That's what the next chair has to help figure out. That's what the next DNC members have to figure out. That's what the next ASDC president has to figure out. So it's not only the infrastructure, but it's also the message. And I deeply believe that we can reform the way that we are doing things. And we have all of the resources that we need. We have amazing major donors. We have such strong small donors, and we have those donors who are even able to give the $500 a month, those kind of in between donors. So we do have this abundance of resources, but we can't have the outside groups with the majority of resources. We got to have the democratic institutions being the core of the democratic functions. And please let progressive groups and all those other groups continue to do all the great issue organizing they are doing. Amazing. Keep doing that. But the core functions of the Democratic Party, registering voters, recruiting candidates, training folks, getting voters to the polls, that belongs within the Democratic Party.
And I would add redistricting, by the way, and
Yes.
reapportionment. And I always felt that that was an unnatural thing to get moved out of
Yes.
the party, right? Because it moves the authority and responsibility outside, to an unaccountable, however virtuous, right? To an unaccountable group that is making decisions. And, so I think I could really talk to you for a very long time. And I know you've got to go in a few minutes. I just want to throw out there that what I didn't really get into, I have my own ideas about things that need to happen next. And one of the things that I just want to throw out there to you for us to continue the dialogue in whatever position you're in, and it will be in all, possibly being the state chair and the head of the chairs and the vice chair of the party. I'm trying to stay very neutral as I possibly can in all of these races, even though I have friends who are running in important
I
places.
appreciate you.
Yeah, yeah. Um, but two things I'll just throw out there that I've been talking about, and I want to just respond to your last point. One is that I am talking a lot about how this is a time where we have to reimagine, reinvent, innovate. We did this 20 years ago. We built new organizations like Center for American Progress and Media Matters, Democracy Alliance in a time when we were out of power. This is a time where we can really take what will be a hard time for us as Democrats and turn it into an exciting time as the generational wheel turns, as we go build the next thing. The thing that we have was inadequate, and we need to go build the next thing, in my view. And I think that's also what makes this moment, a moment of promise, not just a moment of peril for us. The second thing is that I want to throw out there something, because it was related to what you were just saying, which is that I think we have to really rethink of the understanding of what the Democratic Party is not 450 people, but 5 or 6 million people, right? That are proud patriots who are going to work as partners in the fight and not donors to the cause. And, this is something that I think is going to require kind of a big structural rethink about how we engage what we call the grassroots, right? And one of the things that I pushed very hard with the campaign, unsuccessfully, I will say, was the notion of them starting to do these regular Zooms with all of our supporters to engage our supporters and involve them in our politics in a way where they were partners in the fight, where they were able to take our ads and spread them through their networks and become educated about the issues that Kamala Harris is running on so they could be information warriors in their communities. And instead, the only communication that our supporters had around the country from the national party and the national campaign was more angry emails asking them for money. And it created, there's been, I think, an enormous backlash that we have to sort of come to terms with, that people feel like they left it all on the playing field. They gave everything they could. They did all the work they possibly could. And the only way they were talked to was with these emails about give me more, give me more, give me more, instead of treating them like proud patriots and citizens who love their country, who are ready to go fight. And they needed more assignments other than just give me more money or go volunteer over here. And I think there's going to have to be kind of a big discussion about, because the number of volunteers and donors we have grew dramatically in this election. I think it could be as high as 5 or 6 million, up from 3 to 4 million. Well, in my view, just in the way we've misunderstood the role of the parties, we've misunderstood the role of our grassroots supporters. They can do so much more than just give money and run phone banks. They can become information warriors in the 24/7, 365, information war that we're in with the right. But we have to build a politics around that, right? And it's just something that I hope we can keep in a dialogue going forward, Jane, because I know you have to go in a few minutes. And because I do think this is one of the greatest opportunities that we have to unleash unbelievable power that's latent, that's already there in our family, that hasn't been adequately deployed. One of the things that I learned from doing work around disinformation is that the Republican ecosystem is heavily amplified. People on the right know that part of their job as Republicans, as MAGAs, is to spread information through their networks organically, right? It's one of the reasons Republicans did so well, is they have a much greater understanding of the role of organic, shared, amplified content. We don't really do that. We still have an ad-based model, right? And Future Forward was all about ads. It wasn't about creating organic, viral content that moves through the modern networks, the way that people communicate. Well, if we want to do that, we got 6 million people, right, who are ready to go if we give them permission to become information warriors. And I hope it's something that we can continue to have a dialogue about, as once people get into their offices and start developing the plans and doing everything, because I think this has been, we left a lot on the playing field this election, in my view, in terms of things that could have happened that would have been advantageous and helpful to us. And so I throw that out there as just as somebody who's been writing a lot and thinking a lot about the party. Those are just a couple things that I've been, I think we've got an enormous opportunity to make super meaningful progress together. And the second thing is we have to come at it with a spirit of innovation and risk taking and entrepreneurship, and letting go of a thing that didn't work and building a thing that's much better. And I think if we approach it that way, I think the next, 18 months, while it's going to be painful, right, with Trump doing his thing, we could be building something that's deeply powerful, that's going to carry us for a generation forward.
I love this so much, Simon. And how true is this? And look, you and I don't have all the ideas. And if we are doing Zooms like this, we do something called Welcome to the Party calls twice a month, where we do a Zoom in Nebraska. We invite activists and party folks to get on. We give them updates about the party. We ask for feedback. We introduce them to a caucus or a council. We tell them, events coming up. It's a sharing of ideas. An idea from an activist on one of those calls came up for the Democrats Deliver newspaper. So that's something that we now do. We do a newspaper once a year that our block captains deliver, that has updates from the state legislature. It has a vote by mail application in it. It has articles about what Biden and Harris accomplished. So think about all the ideas that we will also get from all of these activists who deeply care about our party, want to do more than hit the Act Blue donate button. Think about the candidates who we can be recruiting from these volunteers. So that's the excitement part for me, that we really
Yeah.
can reimagine and rethink our party and rebuild it in the way that so many of us have been basically screaming from the inside, but because it has been so hyper controlled, because a small group of people knew better. Now it's time for a lot more voices, diverse, rural, urban, and suburban, not just battleground states, but all of us coming together and saying, we are a big tent Democratic Party, and we are going to rebuild in that fashion.
Amen, sister.
Nice.
Let me let you go. Good luck. We'll be seeing you. Make sure you let us know if any of your forums that you're going to be involved in are things that people can watch or
Okay.
are going to be recorded. Because I think people, you've been an important part of our Hopium family over the last year and a half, and I think people want to track your progress. And Jane, I love your spirit. We've been friends a long time. It's been great to reconnect during this election cycle. And I'm really proud of what we did to help you, but I'm more proud of what you did with the resources you had to make a real difference in this election. So thank you for your leadership.
Thanks, Simon, and happy holidays, everybody.
Take care. Thanks.